So Jakob, I mean, this whole issue about putting biology center in front and putting the living center in front, that you can see the post-humanities movement as being an instance of. Is this really something new? Is it as radical as Rosi has been trying to convince us?
Yes, I do think it is new, and I think that's a central challenge to the humanities, really trying to look at humans in relation to all other kinds of organisms and life. And I think that's a central theme in Rosi's work. I would like actually to pose a question in that direction to Rosi, because what I really like about your work, just like Andreas, which you emphasized in your introduction, is its amazing sense of diversity in these emerging critical post-humanities, which you really presented for us now in an impressive manner. Describing a common framework encompassing all this, Rosi, you often use the term vitalism or vital materialism, where we connect to Andreas' questions about life's status in relation to the post-humanities. At the same time, I notice that in your book on the post-human, you state that life is an acquired taste and an addiction. So my question is, why make life a model for the whole universe, including inorganic matter and machines, when life is actually a quite rare and local terrestrial phenomenon? Just after we have left anthropocentrism, aren't we at risk becoming biocentric and discriminating non-life?
Do I go immediately? No,
One, please.
Yeah, you want to. Thank you so much. Typical, tricky question. So, to go back to the start of your question, vital materialism, life as an acquired taste. Vital materialism is critical Spinozism. It's the philosophy that is behind Gilles Deleuze's turn to matter. And I would have argued, had he lived, where Foucault would have gone. But Foucault is virtual Foucault, because he dies at 54, we don't know what he would have done. In other words, philosophies of life that are process philosophies, process ontologies, but take life seriously. French philosophy has that. It has that all the way back through the 18th century, from Diderot, my favorite, and through the philosophy of science. It's a very specific school that I appreciate more and more as I try to come to terms with the capitalization of life in cognitive capitalism. There is no Foucault and Deleuze without Bachelard and Canguilhem. Bachelard is a supervisor, PhD supervisor for Deleuze and for Michel Serres, just two PhD students, among others. And Canguilhem, of course, teaches Foucault the little he knows about science, admittedly. There's a tradition there where matter, the intelligence of matter, is central. And I think Elisabeth de Fontenay's work on Diderot, vital materialism, enchanted materialism, people use different terms. There's continental naturalism, it is also called. I think it's terribly important. The problem with it, and we were discussing this in the gender program, was it yesterday? It feels like 100 years ago. Is that these philosophies of life in the 20th century get in bed with strange bedfellows. There is a contamination between these philosophies of life and the organicist ideologies of fascism. Nietzsche would be the case to look at this. And this is a chapter of philosophy that has not been studied. It has simply been blocked as part of the post-war reconstruction of Europe. The Deleuze and Foucault deliberately revisit. And the text to look at here is Michel Foucault's preface to Deleuze's Anti-Oedipus, the American translation of Anti-Oedipus, where Foucault says Deleuze goes back to philosophies of life. Now, in doing so, he accomplishes the denazification of European philosophy. He shakes out the deterministic, the hierarchical, the power-ridden aspect to extract a philosophy that is process but embedded. And why does he do that? Because he's interested in understanding where capitalism is going. He sees the life sciences coming. He sees the capitalization of life coming and says, how are we going to respond to this? By continuing social constructivism, one is not born, one becomes a woman. Scientifically, they're actually very questionable today. We can't continue with social constructivist methodology in an era where we are coming to what Deleuze calls the expressionism of nature, of matter. So in that way, they revisit those philosophies. And this is where Spinoza comes in, critical Spinoza. It's a philosophy that says we're all part of nature. We had Spinoza, you know. We could have chosen Spinoza instead of Descartes. Descartes gets almost everything wrong. The physics is wrong, the psychology is wrong, but dualism, ladies and gentlemen, dualism is a mode of governance. You divide and conquer, you conquer the world. And our culture went for a deliberate dualism mind-body, on which we postulated white man's burden and the apology of colonialism that Hobbes endorses, that Hegel endorses, white man's burden, us and them. Spinoza was arguing the opposite. We're all part of nature. I'm quoting my teacher, Genevieve Lowe. We're all modulation of the same material. We have this in our philosophy. But in the humanities and social sciences, we can't go there for reasons that have to do with our disciplines. If you say, then I'll shut up. If you say to a geneticist or a neuroscientist, you know what? We're all part of the same meta. They look at you and saying, of course we are. Have you been under a rock for the last 30 years? Of course we are. Tell me something new. Of course we are for the life sciences. This is a problem only for humanities and social sciences, because we have social constructivism, we have dualism, and we are dementedly anthropocentric. I think that this is the operation here. And when I was saying life is an acquired taste, I was desacralizing, denaturalizing life. Life is an ethical project for me of constructing affirmation. That's hard work, because times are what they are. And so it's a praxis of constructing sustainability. And here the example will be Stoicism. And I really read more and more Deleuze and even Foucault, the hermeneutics of the self as a neo-Stoic. You prepare death in life, and life is a project, and it's hard work, and not to be taken. So that's a bit the tension that you singled out in a terribly complex question. So I don't know whether I answered it, but maybe I avoided it well.
A little bit in the sense that, I mean, you see also the inorganic parts of nature and maybe also machines in terms of life.
Yes.
So yes.
Because for Spinoza, who was a technician, may I remind you, Spinoza today would have been one of these geeks, hackers, and programming. If you ever come to Holland, go to see his house in The Hague. This is the house in the dunes, because he got kicked out of everything that he could have been kicked out of, synagogues, universities, cities. And he has his little house in the middle of the dunes, and at the back, the shed where he polished his lenses. He was a technician. For him, there is no ontological difference between a carrot, a baby, and a lens, because the problem for Spinoza is not the origin of entities, it's the force that they are capable of mobilizing. The only question to ask about an entity is, what can a body do? A body for Spinoza is intelligent, it's embrained. It's embrainment of the body, embodiment of the brain. What can a body do? What affects can you mobilize? So technology, that's why Guattari, that's where Guattari gets it from. The three ecologies of Guattari is based on the Spinozist parallelism between the social, the environmental, and the psychic ecologies. It's absolutely crucial. It is such a pity that when the Americans went to Paris to invent French theory, they did not understand Deleuze. They took some sort of Foucault, and they certainly took Derrida and Lacan, with all due respect, great thinkers, but these are the philosophies that are much more materially grounded, that help us think the complexities of life. So yes. And I think we have in Spinoza a perfect media philosophy ready to go. But Hegel didn't like him, so we have the condemnation of Hegel, the same way that we have Badiou poo-pooing Deleuze, criticizing Deleuze for exactly the same reason, this kind of naturalistic and messy, all is nature, what have we got here? So the Hegel-Spinoza debate is very much revived at present.
What I also find inspiring in your work is that you integrate death in this life, and that you state, for instance, that death is just as much behind us as it is in front of us, and you see life, death as a continuum, and part of this broader sense of life, which is termed Zoe. So I'm interested in knowing if what you then think of transhumanism's aspirations towards extending life and maybe moving towards eternal life. Is that a kind of futile aspiration in relation to a life which is actually pervaded with death, in your opinion?
So the several questions in one. The techno-immortalist, Kurt Weiler, those people the Silicon Valley really loves, cryonics included. I don't know, I have very little time for that sort of thing. When I think death, I think it's even dangerous potentially. I get very skeptical. But death immediately breaks down into a number of subplots. The necropolitical. We really have to talk about the ubiquity of the corpse in our social life, in the Mediterranean, at any border of the European Union. I mean, you're the people of Nordic noir. You've made corpses really sexy. When did detective become the favorite genre of the West? If you think about it, it's pretty macabre. I mean, I remember popular culture without corpses as leading characters. So there is the necropolitical, there is extermination, there is devastation, there is genocide, there's all of this. So death is, let's ground it. But my ethical project is much more neo-stoical in the sense that death is something that can only happen in life and that you can only prepare in life. And I think what this means concretely is understanding that the time is what we have and time is a limited portion, but that the fact that we are mortal need not be this catastrophic apocalyptic black hole, which is where the Heideggerians have put death, essentially. Mortality, the horizon, this kind of catastrophic black hole at the end of this. I mean, I think I have enormous problems with Heidegger, and as did Deleuze here, apart from the fact that he was a Nazi. Can we get this one over and done with? Unrepented, absolutely convinced to the end of his life, anti-Semitic, not a collaborator, a Nazi, period. In a way that Nietzsche never was remotely. Nietzsche gets banned from the curriculum, Heidegger never does. This is one of those things of the Second World War that I have a personal quarrel with. So putting death back where it belongs, the awareness that you are limited. Well, that awareness is always already there. Maurice Blanchot, Derrida, Deleuze, the French saying, but that awareness is always already part of being mortal. So as an event, that event has already happened. Get on with it. Get on with living the ethical life, which means drawing the consequences. That in Stoicism, you live every day of your life as if it were the last day. You get ready. But then this means in terms of social, again, my passion for the social justice, and solidarity. If this is the last day that we have to live together, have we done the right thing by each other? Have we said to each other the things that we need to say? And this is why I'm skeptical of this techno-immortality things. It's a way of using the future instead of as a reservoir of the virtual. You're using as a way of avoiding the issue, because we can live forever, like as if one would want to. We have a whole question of life expectancy, but it's a different configuration. I would like to bring these ethics very close to the posthuman project, because it is about extinction of other species. We've lost 7,000 species of insects. Last year in Holland, we had no blackbirds because there were no insects. They're dying because of the pesticides, insecticides. You know, no insects, no bees, no humans. It's sort of, can we look at this with some pietas and some lucidity, taking responsibility? You don't have to look very far. If the bees go, we go. It's not. It's a chain, and the sixth extinction has been triggered. So you know, here is an opportunity to resist the delirium of, you know, great techno-perfectionism, the transhumanist risk, and the apocalyptic lament, something in the middle. And I think this is the posthuman challenge, and we don't have a whole lot of time, but I do think that, again, Stoicism, Epicureanism, Spinoza's ethics are perfectly good examples. We don't have to invent funky things. It's in our archive. Not in the dominant archive. It's the missing people in the history of philosophy that we need to bring back in and say, you know, actually we can do this. We can construct collectively affirmative gestures and encounters and projects if we take death as a responsibility, the death of others, including multiple non-human others. So that's a bit the gamble. They're almost the opposite of the enhancement of Nick Bostrom and the people who really want to perfect some probably white male body, set it into space so that they can live forever. How interesting is that? Fine, whatever. If you want to spend millions in that, but it's a real waste of public money, if I may say so. Yeah.
I learned a new word today, necropolitics. This is something I will ponder on. But Robyn, I mean, why do we need the posthuman to understand what goes on in war and peace today, to understand what goes on in killer robots and modern technologies in warfare? Are these the tools that are necessary to grapple with it?
So you're doing to robots and killer robots. Good for you.
Well, I mean, the work you're referring to that I did with some of my DIIS colleagues on robots and drones certainly works with a lot of the same concepts Rosi is working with about assemblage, about the complexity of the relation between human machine. And, you know, examples in terms of drone pilots, which you were talking about, that there's some discussion that how can you talk about how can robotic warfare be cleaner, you know, less bloody, and does it create an ethical distance because you don't see the face of the other? But in fact, these drone pilots are looking at the face of the other who they have surveillance over for many years. So this focus on complexity, materiality, intra-action, as Karen Barad spoke about here, also is crucial to understand human-machine relations. But that wasn't the question I came prepared with. So do you want to pursue that question, or should I come with?
You can come with what you prepared.
Well, actually, I had a few questions, but I know Rosi is a tour de force or tour de assemblage. What should we call it? So I think I'll go to the last one because I think we'll be running out of time. But it's, of course, we come from, in some ways, parallel backgrounds. We met originally in the 90s. I also work with feminist philosophy, was also inspired by Genevieve Lloyd, the exclusion from the concept of the human and what that means about gender, what that means about race, where you're walking us through in terms of the first and second generation of these critical studies. And in what I understand your focus on in the affirmative is a crucial part of this dialogue because, you know, we are all well-schooled in critique. I think you have this fantastic force in also the constructive, the creative dimension. And you articulate this through your focus on the affirmative. And as somebody who works in a section on peace, risk, and violence, and formerly Holocaust and genocide studies, I've had a lot to do with the negative. And I think there are two aspects of this question. In focusing on the affirmative, what does that mean about the negative? You referred to in the second generation studies, history, trauma studies, memory studies, you know, human rights, I think, studies. Yes. There's so much, as you say, so much suffering, so much that brings us to tears in terms of an affective role. What does it mean to talk about an affirmative in relation to that? And I think it's important to know some of the critical debates about this. For example, there's also, you know, pop discussion, I think was also on the screen, of resilience, where the idea of resilience is to choose the affirmative, not to be stuck in the past, not to be stuck in trauma, not to be suffering, but to move forward, to show that, you know, if you're in combat, it can be a growth experience. The critique of that is, well, you know, isn't that sort of a neoliberal form of governance where structural problems are put on to individual responsibility, and if you don't solve it, it's because your own failure to be resilient and robust and ready, as opposed to, you know, structural responsibility for it. So, and in terms of psychology, you know, there's also this contemporary interest in positive psychology, which is in the US military as well, and as a way of solving the problem of trauma. We don't want trauma, even though trauma was the sort of big product of the Vietnam veterans struggle, it's very expensive. So let's be resilient instead. Resilience is affirmation. But what's wrong with that kind of affirmation if it doesn't weight also the negative? So that's one dimension. The question is about the nature of the affirmative for you.
Fantastic question. Thank you so much, Robyn. Your philosophical passions show through this. She's my favorite Kantian, the only one I can bear, really. Spot on question. One general reply, and then I go into the nitty-gritty of the affirmative. Notions like resilience, for me, are like diversity and sustainability. They've gone. They've gone into the corporate neoliberal machinery. They're practically useless to any ends and purpose in terms of conceptual clarity. They do the work of disciplining and punishing, and they privatize the consequences and the damages of neoliberal governance. You're supposed to be living through part-time jobs with precarious working conditions, get your grants, get the money, and stay fit mentally, psychically, do not get indebted, have food thrown at you day in and day out, but do not put on weight, have credit cards thrown at you, but do not go bankrupt. This completely schizoid injunctions, which is what advanced capitalism does, particularly to the youth. So I think notions like this are absolutely corrupt in the sense that they become modes of governance, and we need to look at them very, very carefully. I was looking at my beloved university recently, and the new measures that Utrecht has taken, all of them are lifestyle measures. There is nothing about student debt and the crisis of the humanities, but only vegan and vegetarian food in the cafeteria. No smoking anywhere, even outside campus. Everybody needs to do 20 minutes of exercise for every 2 hours of sitting down. So I said to the rector, are we running a gym or a university here? What are we running? At what particular point do the universities legislate on lifestyle? And it's the same in every corporate existence. This absolute disciplining and punishing of everyday life is extraordinary. And I think these are when those concepts enter the spinning machine, and they do a different job. But the question, the conceptual core of your question is elsewhere. It's a question of affirmation and pain. Spinoza is absolutely clear on this, and if you look at Deleuze's booklet, Spinoza, Practical Philosophy, which is written in normal human language because Guattari is not part of it. So the language is human. The moment Felix comes in, everything goes, is a brilliant guy, but really berserk. So this is human language, you can read it very carefully. It makes it quite clear that the old Spinozist ethics of joy is a way of processing pain. It is not a way of avoiding it. It's not facile optimism. What is the problem of ethics for Spinoza? Joyful ethics enhances your ability to open up to the world. For Spinoza, an entity, baby carrot, lenses, computer, is a bunch of power, energy, potentia, the power to do things, to become. It's the capacity to affect and be affected. That's what any entity is. Different degrees, because of course earthworms are capable of certain things, flies of others, bats, dolphins of others, mushrooms, we read Anna, of others, humans, different degrees. And here the distinction that Foucault makes between potestas and potentia, negative power, positive power, not as dualistic opposites, but two facets of the same thing, is capital. When Deleuze talks about force and power, it's potentia, it's the power to become. So the ethical life is increasing your capacity to take in and take on the world. But, says Spinoza, taking in and taking on the world means taking in the poison of the world. It's the metaphor of poison for Spinoza. Opening up to the world. Come on, how much of Trump can we watch before we have to vomit? 2.5 minutes now, after almost 2 years. But it's really hard going. And now that I know the details about his sexual morphology, it's getting really even worse. How much of this can we take? And for Spinoza, is you need to really train. It's a bit. You can do this with Derrida and the pharmacon. You can take doses, but then immediately the ethical life. You need to see this is too much. If I take one more, I will precipitate into the black hole of depression, resentment, envy, fear. So stop and process. Processing is done in a community. The construction of affirmation is a social effort together to see that some things go in different directions. So it is detoxing from the poison and the construction of social platforms whereby together we can actually act on something. All this very localized, is very kind of micropolitical in some respect. So it is a way of processing the pain, and there will be nothing incompatible with just mourning. You know, just mourning. I mean, when Freud says mourning is interminable, mourning and melancholia is never ended, well, it takes a lot of work. It's a very active state to rework, to reorganize, to continue, to work through. So, and then think of our job, trying to think through this. If we do what the university does not want us to do in the humanities, which is think about the present, because we're encouraged to always think about the past. Remember, PhDs have to be written about dead authors. We cannot write a PhD about a living author because it's risky, right? And maybe the person changes. So this cult of the past in the humanities, the cult of our own history, if we dare to actually go into the present, well, then we really have to find mechanisms by which we detox ourselves from the worst aspects of it and honor the complexity and work towards it. So it's a constant effort, and it makes the ethical life a very active life, even if you do nothing except make certain things thinkable. Just to think through, for instance, fascism. No, you know, it's so nice to think that Nazism was the loss of human reason. It was not. It was carefully planned. It was of the order of thinkability. And if we can't say that in 2018, we can't even start the discussion about the new form of proto-fascism that are sprouting around us. Bring it into the realm of thinkability means that you detox it, that you can actually come to terms with it, but that you is a collective entity. No one can do this alone. And I think that that's a bit what I would propose. You can also do it with, I do it with Esposito, the biopolitical school, immunity. You build up conceptual immunity, and you build up ethical immunity. You build up resistances by taking doses and taking it on. Take it on. Do not get depressed. Do not let that heaviness go into your soul, whereby all of a sudden powerlessness is all we have. Well, that's what fascism is, the powerlessness of the soul. It's when you just don't feel that anything can happen. I think that is the risk that we're running. And Deleuze calls it microfascism, small scale, but the sense that this is too big. What are we going to do? Well, we need to empower ourselves to act affirmatively. And I think that's what higher education should do. Activate the potentia of our younger researchers. Activate them to think differently, to dare to take on the present, not retreat into safe formulae of what is going to get you the grants, or get the grants and then do something else with it. Sorry, did I say that? No, I didn't. Like it's that kind of conceptual courage, and not because we need dead heroes, but because we need to come to terms with the present. I think that's.
Can I make just one follow-up comment, or are we running out of time? I know we're running out of time.
We always run out of time.
I don't know if you know the work of Sabine Spielrein and her analysis of this discussion about the interrelation between destruction and creation, of birth and death, which, of course, some people have claimed is a background for Freud's analysis of Eros and Thanatos. And now you can have have on a biological, a cellular level, and I think on an ontological level, on a human level, in terms of sexual reproduction. I have found her work very inspiring, and I recall in that essay, The Destruction as the Origin of the World, that she said at one point, because of this interpenetration of creation and destruction, it really is a matter of taste, which you choose. And here you spoke before about, you know, navigating between the apocalyptic and the futuristic, and we certainly know the apocalyptic. I don't know if you've seen Black Mirrors, have you? Oh. And, you know, the Southern Reach trilogy. I mean, we know the apocalyptic and its fascination. So what is it? Is it what you describe yourself as pathologically optimistic? Is that why it's affirmative in terms of the struggle between creation or destruction? Or is there some marking, some grounding for choosing that path? Or what can guide us in navigating between these dark and light?
I think my quip about being a pathological optimist is sort of a trait of my personality, but affirmation is not a psychological state. I think that that's absolutely crucial. Maybe there should have been the short answer to your first half of your question. Affirmation and negativity are not psychological states. They are degrees of force. They are degrees of power. They are geometrical forces for Spinoza. How much can you open up and take it on before it becomes too much? And we are schooling people to retreat more and more and more inwards and just pretend that this is not happening. Well, that's not the way we're going to fight this. We have to just go out and train ourselves. So there's a bit of a combat, a metaphor. So the facile optimism of capitalism is a huge difficulty here, because they're throwing ridiculous cheerfulness. If I see one more picture of Gwyneth Paltrow, I'm going to scream. She's always this kind of, for me, it's the cheerful, the shallow, lovely girl, cheerfulness of the system. No, affirmation is hard work in some respect, and it comes from the materialism. We go back to the discussion about death, and all things must pass. The decay is part of the process, and the poison is part of the oxygen, and you can't take in the world and not take in violence and rubbish, and there's no purity involved here. It's the job of constructing possible modes of relation that would enable us to act in an affirmative manner, even minimally, even just lifting the sense of heaviness and impossibilities, and the sense that it's already lost, that is all going wrong, even that simple, banal, which is incredibly important because it stops your thinking through the great contradictions of the era. So it's the praxis of reworking it constantly. And I do think that here Stoicism is the model. It's what Foucault was doing, except that he didn't finish, in his rejection of Platonism. Bring back the more humble, modest techniques of the self, the daily practices, which for the Stoics are meditation, examination of conscience, make friends with death, have I done the right thing? On a small, minute scale, step by step, very practical, very grounded. Not transcendental consciousness creating an ethical life based on some teleological premises. Grounded, humble, this is my territory, this is my land, I stand by it. And on this territory, people will not be killed, migrants will not be lynched, LGBTs will not be raped. I stand from this territory. Achille Mbembe, who invented the necropolitical, talks about the Anthropocene as the becoming indigenous of the West. Learn from the indigenous populations. Take care of your territory and your street, your city, your land. And every political gesture has to be grounded. And I think this is extremely important, considering the rise of violence, intolerance, and it's quite simply the killing and lynching of people. My country, Italy, is showing the grounds, as usual. We did that in the 30s, we're doing it again. So I think fighting for this. In Utrecht, we put on a big fight to have a mosque. We beat Rotterdam to it. We have the most beautiful mosque in the Netherlands with 4 minarets, not very tall, but there are 4 minarets to keep the Swiss happy. And we are proud of this. On our territory, this happens. We have a synagogue, we have a mosque, we have churches. We are of 2018, and get a life. And I think it's as simple as that. And the discussions were not pretty in terms of the right wing objecting to the presence of these alien bodies on our territory. A simple, straightforward example, but we could bring it to our practice as academics, what we teach and what we encourage students. Switch Rosi off, as they say.
We will have a hard time switching you off, but it's time to switch on the audience. So, if you have questions, raise them, and we have seen it going around with a microphone. So, I got also an answer to my question. So, what is the idea of the future as the virtual unfolding of the affirmative aspect of the present? I'm currently based in the UK, and I always get a bit worried when Theresa May talks about affirmative actions. But I think
that's even not what she's saying.
Different story. It seems to me that the second part of your sentence, the future is a virtual unfolding of the affirmative aspect of the present, which honors our application to the generation to come, is really what saves it. It's something about taking it from a perspective of a potential future we that gives some kind of dimension to the affirmative. But anyway, Sina, do we have any questions in the audience?
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Johanna Seibt. I actually contributed to your book. I have great sympathies for the critical conceptual gestures that you have presented as a wonderful fireworks here. What I'm concerned about is credibility. You mentioned Richard Rorty. In 1992, I said to my colleagues at the University of Texas at Austin, who were all into post-structuralism, post-modernism, post-something, I said to them, you will pay for that. You are lost in what Hegel called the bad infinity, negative infinity. This is meta-philosophy running wild in cultural philosophy. You are destroying what the pragmatists actually identified as, and you are now, from my point of view, very valuably sort of reformulating in the terms of grounded perspectivalism. You're destroying paths towards truth, where truth is not correspondence, but it is a process, a procedure, an honest, Habermas was one, an honest procedure that we ideally go through in order to get to the truth. So my question is this, with all the sympathy that I have, aren't we doing the humanities a big disservice when we mix in one go cultural philosophy, ethics, metaphysics, metaphilosophy? I said the same thing to Donna Haraway when she was here. Isn't it better to actually return to a certain element of academic calm, where you, on the basis of adopting the epistemic economies that you want to reject to some extent, right? But on the basis of that, we're presenting new theories and new models. Very simply put, affirmation is certainly something that is immediately aspiring. But then when we ask how and where, right, we immediately get into the problem again that if I were to ask you, why should we include the poor trailer people? Yeah, justice. Who's justice? Yeah? So we never can get out of that, the critical spin here. So how do we get from affirmation to presenting credible ethical recommendations? How do we get from the metaphysics of becoming to a sophisticated, sufficiently differentiated ontology?
Could I just, to understand correctly, to whom did you make the remark that post-structuralism is destroying the capital of the pragmatists? Did you make that point to Rorty? Because I didn't understand what the frame of that interlocution was.
Well, I made that point. I mean, there's another story of what is happening in America. You can also say, well, it's fake truth. Who destroyed the fake truths? it's the cultural theorists that started attacking pragmatist models of truth.
Yeah, so you're going into postmodernism, post-truth. I see. Yeah. Well, of course, we're going to have to disagree on this, but let me take it by step. I think what we have, it's absolutely true that the debate on the posthuman is bringing back the postmodern stuff. It's bringing back the same type of anger, resentment, resistance, and also there's a recycling of the same type of insults. For instance, a return of relativism and issues like this. There's been a couple of essays I've seen on postmodernism, posthumanism, because all the posts resonate with each other. I never call myself a postmodernist. Deleuze is not even a post-structuralist, is a neo-foundationalist, and a neo-materialist is what I've always called this, but never mind the labels here. I think there's something very important about where we're looking at to get the credibility. And I have enormous respect for the position you're defending. Would we be not better off with, I'll use my language, forgive me, within the parameters, the protocols of the disciplines, having calmer, more reasoned debates to deal with the complexities of the day. I cannot, however, not ask the question immediately, who is the we who would be conducting that conversation? My eyes have always been, but this dates from the age of 14, onto the world. I want a university that looks like the world that it serves. I don't want a university that is a temple of ancient knowledge. I respect the knowledge of the past. I think that's what we need to preserve and teach. But not only. It cannot be all that we do, not at times like this. And what has been a trait of my academic career, because I work with cartographies, which when I do 40 minutes, of course, they become a bit quick, but in my written word, I'm a lot more careful to ground my statements. Producing a cartography, you are kind of defining a field. You're photographing a moment. You are the messenger of mostly bad news. And what I think is happening in the debate on the posthuman, as it happened in the postmodern debate, is that the messenger gets blamed for the message. Trust me, I wish I had designed cognitive capitalism. I really wish I had had that power. But I was trying to convince you, but by the sheer quantity of the work that is being produced, that something is moving at the level of productive discourses, that people are actually looking at inhuman, non-human in a variety of ways. I'm not making this up. I'm reading it. I'm detecting it, and I'm bringing it to the attention of the community. Why? Because I think it actually expresses something about our ethical desires, our ethical tensions, our pain, to speak a bit more like our anxiety, which I think are very legitimate considering where we are stationed and positioned. So I would like maybe to try to see if we can find some middle grounds between, so we say, immutable scientific credibility and something that is accountability to the world. At a time when we are really also a bit under criticism for being, elitist. It's populist stuff, we know, but that the university is too disconnected from the world. There's neither here nor there, but accountability for where we're at. I think for me, that's the source of maybe another form of credibility. But when I bring back, the Stoics and Spinoza, I am honoring a tradition. I'm also saying that this tradition is marginal within a grand history of philosophy that has made certain choices. And there were choices determined by power concerns. And in that sense, yes, I am a student of Foucault. I see myself as bringing cartographies. I don't think I'm responsible for the state of the world. I wish I had that power. And I think the posthuman convergence is upon us. I think this is what's happening. And it has an enormous impact on how the humanities survive or not in the university. If philosophy is happy to just become the inevitable compulsory chapter of ethics of any application for Horizon 2020, well, then I feel very sorry for this brilliant discipline that has so much else that it could do for the world. But I'm also very happy to see that this is my own preference, and I respect the tradition, but I don't want to monumentalize it. I want to activate it in the present. Maybe, can I draw you in as an eminent
Well, actually, because I was thinking on my way to Aarhus of the conference that I attended that Johanna organized in, 2015 on the Robo-Philosophy Conference on social robots. And so I know her work is, I would say, keenly in this field of the complexity of the human and the technological. So as I understand this discussion, your difference is it's not so much in the object of knowledge as in the methods to which to understand that. For example, during that conference, I remember a very provocative talk called "Do Robots Have Rights?", where the answer to that question was yes, because
robots pay tax. Also a big yes.
I mean, the version of that talk, I think it's since gone through a revision, but the answer to that was, in the question of do robots have rights, we're always asking what is our relation to ourselves as human. If one were to treat something, any interaction, although an interaction with a robot, as if it were not deserving of respect, recognition, perpetrating a kind of slave or otherness or exclusion, what does it do to the human? And taking that as an ethical inspiration. So I think the question here is, what methods can we draw on? And of course, the question of the post and post-human is the same as the post and post-modern. I don't know if you remember Andreas Geussen's article about this, how the post has to always be understood not as chronologically post, but as always deeply embedded in and drawing from that tradition. So there are also questions lurking here about the relation to origins and the relation to the future.
But I do think some of these articles that I've seen on post-truth and postmodernism are really objectionable. I think it's such a cheap shot to say that Derrida is responsible for fake news. What are we even talking about? The erosion, the new contingencies that came in the 80s, the new process philosophy that came in, have very, very different origins and targets. And if there is anything that erodes the substantial existence of anything, is capitalism. All that is solid melts into air. So again, to blame the messengers for the message, I think I've seen a couple of things on postmodernism, post-truth, and I think, oh, come on, and we can do better than this. Those are really cheap shots. I think there are far more complex issues at stake in the recapitalization of knowledge. But where we look at the methodology and what kind of credibility, I think there's a fundamental question. And there we need to agree to differ, that we will be looking at different things. It does not prevent us from working together or in different manners. Different perspectives is also different approaches to do this. Yeah.
We have a question from the back here?
I hope not. Oh, no.
Thank you. It's perhaps in continuation of this question of power. The title of your talk and what you talked about was this: what is human in the humanities today? But it seems to me that in the definition of the human, the dominant power is not the humanities. There are several other disciplines out there defining the human, and I will mention three. For one, a biological, medical definition combined with neuroscience and perhaps also cognitive science, which is very much in wake and can be combined with marketing and so on. And that's the second part, the economic definition, man as Homo economicus, perhaps combined with some behavioral economics, neuroeconomics, sort of that. And the third, the legal definition, which seems to be very much sticking to the classical Enlightenment definitions of man. And it seems to me that these three disciplines are much more dominant in defining the human than the humanities. And of course, there can be a struggle that humanities should. But how should we, as humanists, what should we do in comparison with these? And shouldn't these be addressed much more than what is going on in the humanities? It could be a very narrow discussion talking about only the humanities.
I think it's exactly spot on. Is the essential question. I think that I said at the study, we've always in the humanities, we've been actually happy to delegate the question of the human to biology and anthropology, and today to the new assemblages that are being created by the new biology, the new neurosciences. I would throw in the algorithms as well, the algorithmic codes that really are so central to the making of our knowledge production and our economies and everything. Is really, I think that the jury is out on this. I don't have a quick answer, but have the humanities lost the human? Have we lost that one? We used to have men. There was a whole battle about critiquing that man, because the man of reason, you touch at your own risk and peril. That, in a sense, when Foucault talks about the death of man in 1966, is ringing an alarm bell, saying, you know, humanism is really in trouble. This was 66, imagine. The world order is changing. New forms of knowledge are being produced. Can we go on with this figuration, or do we need to think differently about what we are becoming? And then he goes into long descriptions of ethnography, of psychoanalysis, what he sees as the new forms of knowledge. I find it a very inspirational text. The early Foucault is really, really extraordinary. And I think the Posthumanism is very much modeled on that, what new forms of knowledge are coming up. My answer is the humanities can survive to the extent that they are willing to really reinvent themselves on the basis of our own history and tradition. We can't, doesn't mean that we model ourselves on the sciences. Have the courage to re-explore some of our own, some of the neglected texts. I mean, I was talking about the philosophies of life, with all of that would be my proposal, but people are working very much. There's a big movement on pragmatism, on Whitehead, on Wittgenstein. There's all kind of process philosophies are being experimented with as way of coming to terms. But I think we need to create some other figurations of the human. Critical posthumanities is an interim phase. We are not going to be happy with that. It's a vehicle to trying to figure out what we're capable of becoming. We don't have a whole lot of time, insofar as the attack on the humanities is part and parcel of this particular phase of populist illiberal regimes. The attacks are pretty vehement. And they translate into cutting in funding and transforming the field into compulsory teaching. We teach much more than the sciences do. We make a lot of money through teaching for the university, but we are not rewarded by research time. So the transformation of the humanities institutionally should alert us to the danger that we're in. I'm absolutely convinced that we can come up with different prototypes by having the multiple figuration of the humanities I was already suggesting. Look how much of this is already happening. How much of that is humanities methodologically, in terms of the archive, in terms of the text that they use? Now that is the question. Try to work with your digital humanities, environmental humanities, medical humanities people, and you will see that the methods are not humanities methods. I think that the methodology here is the cutting off point. The themes are, some of the texts can even be, but the way the arguments are constructed is, usually STEM research disguised as humanity, but they call it humanities. So I think that is a battle line. Recreating it through a multiplicity of missing people configurations is what I think we should do. We need money, we need resources, we need careers being built with fundamental humanities research, and I don't see that happening immediately. But it's a battle that I would definitely participate in.
We don't really have time for another question, but
Thank God.
I should take it anyway.
That's what you guys talk about.
Maybe I will just pose a little
Please.
question.
I thought you were going to answer him. No.
You are generally talking about the post-humanities in an affirmative terms, and also all these related terms like ahumanism and the inhuman, post-anthropocentrism, and so on. I nevertheless remark that some places in your book on the post-human, for instance, when discussing war, you use the term inhuman in a negative way. So I'm wondering how if it's not something human, which we should posit as antagonism to the inhuman, when the inhuman is negative, what is it? Could we find a kind of positive ethic category which is kind of going against the perverted inhuman, but which is nevertheless not old-fashioned humanist?
Well, okay, so again, you're the man of the really multi-layered questions. In the posthuman glossary, I think we have 3 or 4 entries on the inhuman. Just to tell you just that. There's the leotards inhuman, there's queer inhuman, there is psychoanalytic inhuman, multifaceted. That what we call the human is composed by non-human elements, whether you go with the bacteria of Anat Singh or with the psychoanalytic idea that animality is built into our psychic system, that the persistence of death in our midst makes the human always already human. A body is becoming corpse as it goes. All the beautiful stuff on death and dying, that there is the inhuman in our psychic horizon. I think that or whether you go with the object ontologies where the inhuman is a computation, a thinking capacity, which in the olden days used to be contained by the human brain, and today has been lifted from the human brain outside to computational network. In humanist rationalism, which is one of the big things, Brazier and the boys, as I call them, enormously complex because it's disembodied, it's the opposite of everything I argue for. It's not embedded, it's not accountable, but inhuman rationalism is big time. Nick Bostrom is almost there, but of course he has to play the moral card because Oxford is a moral institution. But there's all of that.
He's a camouflage
humanist. The inhumane, I think so the inhuman is quite a composite field. If you say the inhumane is a different story. And when I say inhuman, I'm a little more careful now. I really look at the inhumane aspect of the situation, which are many and multiple. So depending on what issue and problem we are addressing, there's potestas and potentia. A lot of what we do is repairing the damages of what goes on certainly in our academic work. We do that regularly. So a lot of it is repair work. It's saying no, it's in very standard systems of the dominant morality. The quest for a different ethics doesn't mean that you reject everything that we have and you exit the planet. It means to supplement it with discussion. We could be looking at how Martha Nussbaum does it. Should we give human rights to cells and genes and algorithms? Should everything get human rights so that we protect it? But human rights is a complicated issue for French philosophy, for Deleuze, for feminists, for queer people. Who's the human that gets the rights? The human is not a neutral term. There's no universalism acceptable in my philosophy anyway. So I think it's looking at some of the repair work, and I think we have to do a lot at the moment because the necropolitical is incredibly alive, and racism is really on the rise, and xenophobia on the rise. The posthuman ethics quest is for another way of dealing with what we could make out of this, what could be a possible scenario of actually generative cooperation. Would we even be accepted as interlocutors? But we go back to the question of credibility by the community, by the scientific community, but also by society. We are the people who wrote the science fiction, who did the critical, what was it, Nina? Critical science fantasies, critical social fantasies, and we've been looking. The radical epistemology have been looking at social justice's attacks for decades. Would that give us some role to play in the construction of another approach, accepting Zoe egalitarianism, but making differences and embracing this opportunity to discuss what we can become, we as inclusive as possible without missing 2/3 of the world population. Anyway, so that would be, you jumped in, Robyn.
No, it was just because this question about the inhuman or inhumane, you're asking about what the normative content of the human is, and what grounding of that, what justification for that normative content there is in a post-human enterprise. And I actually was thinking back to your earlier work from the 90s and the way you talked about the category of woman and where your claim, yeah, back there, first generation, as you called it, as you talked about it, then where you claimed, well, you know, we want to be able to talk about the category of woman not in terms of claiming a content, a universal content, but in terms of establishing, I don't know what your phrase was, a collaboration, a solidarity. A solidarity. And so, you know, I'm curious, would you say similarly about the human and the post-human, that it's not because you want to make a claim, you wouldn't want to make a claim about the content and what that human is, it's such a charged heritage with all these exclusions and power dynamics, but nonetheless, there are strategic roles for it in debates about human rights, in debates about the UN Refugee Convention. So does it play a strategic role in the Jacob's sense, a strategically normative role?
Thank you for translating. Yes, absolutely, yes. That's why I finished, like, this is the only world we have. This is the only humanity that we have. Absolutely grounded, differential, planetary, generous, and critical, a balancing act. But that would be a we that we could actually work with. And I think that higher education should facilitate this and make it possible for that community that is open, but at the same time normatively conjoined and in solidarity. And acknowledging, particularly if we're looking at climate change and indigenous land rights, you know, a few historical debts, but trying to create, to regenerate possible scenarios together. Yes, absolutely. In that sense, when I finished the Tanner's lecture last year, I said post-human, all too human. If you want to go with Nietzsche in this respect, but the human as the locus of the overcoming of its own premises and becoming.
So we didn't orchestrate it like this, but it might actually be fitting given how the discussion has developed. The final question will be asked by Anne-Marie Pahus, who is the Dean of Research for what used to be the Faculty of Humanities, but is now the Faculty of Arts. Interesting.
Arts, well done.
And knowing Anne-Marie, I think she will speak not from a position of the power of the vice-deanship, but of a position of positionality, which I guess it is to be a pro-dean for research.
Yes, I'm asking this very simple question as a philosopher, I think. Do you see a difference between thinking and action, thinking and acting? And if your answer is thinking is a kind of action, can I then, because I suppose that is the answer, would you then say that there are ways of thinking that are more fruitful than others? I was thinking about Bachelard. You mentioned his work. I consider him to be a very poetic philosopher. He actually cannot think in English. I mean, he thinks in French, and he thinks of in his book on L'eau et les rêves, he talks about rivière as the most French word the most French word that he can think of is rivière. So my question is there a difference between thinking and acting? And are there ways of thinking that are more active and affirmative than others?
Oh, wow. You had to have the complex question at the end. So where would I go with this? Are there ways of thinking that are more preferable to others, and the difference between thinking and acting? I think in the Spinozist frame, there is a very clear categorization of forms of knowledge. The key to the Spinozist ethics of joy is adequate understanding. And adequate understanding, the third order of knowledge, is the complicated one. Spinoza begins what then Nietzsche will also do, talk about the tendency for thinking to be reactive. You react to conditions, critically, creatively, but you are hetero-directed. The outside tells you what to do. In a sense, doing cartography is also reacting. And the danger with reacting is it does not empower you to take in and on more of the world. Nietzsche will go further and say the problem with reactive thinking, it breeds stupidity. I mean, the whole discussion of stupidity is really part of this. Again, something that we can't say today because people get insulted. Why would you get insulted? I didn't call you stupid. I said we have a problem with stupidity. There are two different statements, but try it. It's always very provocative. So it's very important to get to the orders of knowledge that would make your thinking adequate. Adequate to what? To the state of your ingrained body in the world. There has to be this parallelism between how you live and how you think. And I think this is why when people don't like Spinoza, they say it's an ethics that is epistemologically driven. It's about understanding. If you understand the conditions of your bondage, and when he defines freedom as the understanding of the condition of your bondage, it's putting understanding as the filter. So I think thinking adequately is hard work, and in that sense it is a form of action, in that it requires an ethics that allows you to transform the negative, which is what you get when you try to operate in the world. It's not enough, but it is active. It is acting in the world. The ethical life requires what then Deleuze called assemblages, connection, encounters, the cultivation of relations. And those are and can be eminently poetic. When you were speaking, I was thinking of Edouard Glissant, The Poetics of Relation, one of the most beautiful texts of nomadism, hybridity, and interconnections. Again, why don't we have post-colonial theory that works with Glissant? Why do we always have to go to the English language to do post-colonial theory? There's so much good stuff in other languages, and Glissant would be an example. So there are differences of degrees between thinking and acting, but the adequate understanding is the crucial motor. So a short answer would be that DIIS thinking is a form of action, because it requires an ethical cleansing, so to speak, an ethical cleaning up. Not enough, but it is a start. Most thinking is a difficult labor for Deleuze also. You think against the stream, and I think, and we think much less than we imagine. We react a lot. But actual thinking in the forms of elaborating forms of disengagement from the condition of a bondage, that's hard work, and we tend to avoid it as much as possible. Hence the problem of stupidity and repetition of what already is the case. It's pretty tough in that sense, and it irritates a lot of people. They say, oh, it's like it's demanding too much of people, that we spend time thinking whether we're thinking adequately about our conditions. But I find it extremely useful as a way of dealing with processes of change in that sense. I'd like to think a little bit more about this, but that would be a first reply. The poetics, the arts in this, of course, are so very important, less for Spinoza than for Deleuze, who famously drew the parallelism between philosophy, science, and the arts. In What is Philosophy, in 1994, Deleuze and Guattari put them on the same level, at the same plane of credibility, of truth value, no hierarchy of knowledge, like on the same level. So you would have approved of a faculty becoming faculty of the arts, absolutely. Experimenting with different ways of thinking about what we're capable of becoming. That's thought in action, and only specific conditions would make it possible. Perfect for a high-level university like this one. So good luck.
Thank you. Please help me to thank the...
So what do you think, thinking and acting?
And then you have one more. First, we have a collective action to do. So, Rosi, we are bringing you goodies from Aarhus.
Fantastic.
There is a wonderful series here called Tænkepauser, or kind of small reflections, that deals with trivial issues. So here's a book on questions.
Fantastic.
And then one on trust.
Oh, wow.
And finally,
so you guys wrote this?
Anne-Marie Pahus, who asked the last question, wrote about love.
You have to sign it for me, love.
If you're ever in doubt in the short answer to a difficult question, go to Aarhus University Press.
I love this.
And then some chocolate to keep the lenses of the world apart.
Thank you. That's affirmation, all right? Thank you very much. Very gracious. Wow.